Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. As Malaysia takes the helm of ASEAN as chair in 2025, it steps into a leadership role for one of the world's most dynamic regions. ASEAN is on track to become the fourth largest economic bloc by 2030. However, it also faces immense challenges from navigating an increasingly fragmented global order to advancing regional integration amid rising protectionism. So can Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN make a lasting impact beyond just 1 year? And how can ASEAN strengthen its collective voice and economic clout in a polarised world? So these are some of the pressing questions that we're going to explore tonight with our guest today, Datuk Professor Dr. Mohd Faiz Abdullah, who is the chairperson of the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, better known as ISIS Malaysia. Prof, welcome to the show. It is so good of you to join me. Thank you for being here today. Let's talk a little bit about this coming year. It's going to be the fifth time that Malaysia is going to be the chair of ASEAN. And I think, as I mentioned in my introduction, it's coming at a time of it's an interesting period. It's a fragmented world, and we are stepping into a leadership role with this bloc. What do you think our priorities ought to be during this time?
Thank you, Melisa. Well, priorities will come with kind of like a dual symbolic here. Priorities could generate into opportunities. It could also be a way of avoiding more hazardous situations. I think top on the list, I have to say, would be the question of centrality. Because the word centrality has become some sort of a mantra where people tend to use it as a soundbite when push comes to shove, are unable to pinpoint where are the stronger areas of uncertainty and where are the weaker areas. So that would be a major challenge. Centrality will be priority in the sense of, do we deal with the underlying or fundamental issues that impact on the success or failure of this centrality? That would be one area of discussion that's worth looking at.
Can you elaborate what you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is that lately, especially particularly after the coup in Myanmar, there was the 5-point consensus that shows centrality. But at the same time, when we say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating, which is one of the top lists on the consensus 5-point, would be the stopping of military or any kind of violence by the junta. From the time that it was agreed, not one point of the centrality issues was resolved. So the consensus was basically ignored. Well,
so you're saying the consensus that has been the main driver of how ASEAN has addressed the Myanmar crisis has not progressed, has not progressed.
If I might just add to that, why do I say just because it hasn't progressed, is it a failure of centrality? Why do I say that? Is because there are different reactions, different levels of attitude towards this non-compliance. For example, you find that Malaysia would be one of the most vocal, I would use the word vociferous, in condemning the non-compliance. Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim, the first thing he came to office, among other things, he said, we need to carve Myanmar out. Why? Because they are just not conforming. They're thumbing their nose against all of us. How can we allow them to carry on? And somebody thought that it was really very strong. It could have been a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a slip of the tongue for all because he doubled down in Beijing. He said it again in Manila and in Indonesia as well. So that point is quite clear, but you will find that some of the other member states, I don't wish to name anybody, are not very, very gung-ho on this condemnation. So there you can see there's no unity, which is a sign that the centrality was not working.
Okay, let's unpack the ethos of centrality. Why do you think centrality may no longer work in this day and age? And is there an alternative to centrality?
Thank you. You raised that because I do not think the centrality won't work. I'm saying that right now we have more instances where centrality is being seen to fail. But like we said, you know, it's not sunset yet for centrality. Because you mentioned ethos, you have to go back to first principles. The formation of ASEAN itself was centered on this concept called Zopfan, saying of peace, freedom and neutrality. Neutrality now has become a byword. because when you say neutrality, people seem to think that you fold your arms and do nothing. That was not what neutrality was meant to be. Neutrality would mean that you do not unnecessarily interfere in another member state over their domestic affairs.
So neutrality has somehow evolved into inaction.
Indifference as well. Indifference. In fact, that one of the key phrases that was used by the Prime Minister, in neutrality is not a license for indifference. And therein lies a failure of centrality. Because the other parties, some would say we cannot interfere at all, and some say we have to interfere. Yeah? So these two must come to a point of convergence where centrality will reassert itself.
Is it all or nothing? Can centrality work?
It works. In fact, it still works. That, like I said, there are some instances of failure and some instances where there is still sunshine over the other side. I give you a direct example, CPTPP. Not all member states are in CPTPP, yet they continue to trade, yet the economic advancement continues to move on a northward trajectory. That shows that there is still inclusiveness and centrality. So what would be the burden on the shoulder of Malaysia as chair? It would be to push again strongly this principle of centrality, that we should agree on as much as possible, and if we disagree, we should minimize our differences. One clear example, South China Sea conflict. The way the Philippines handles it, the way Vietnam handles it, and the way Malaysia handles it, you will find that that's not central at all.
Yes.
Yes.
So there is centrality on the surface, but there's a ripple of disagreement, an undercurrent of disagreement.
Right. That's right.
Does that risk fracturing this bloc?
Interesting. Fracturing is perhaps I'm more on the side of optimism. I would rather err on the side of the optimism here, because fracturing would be a bit strong a word, I would say, which would mean once you have a fracture, it's very difficult to put it back. Yeah, very difficult to repair. It is, shall we say, it's trying slowly straining on the seams. As it hasn't broken apart yet. So it is not broken. It can be fixed. There are weaknesses. There are points of, some of them is quite fundamental. It would be incumbent on anyone taking the chair, in this case 2025, moving on to the ASEAN Community Vision of 2045, for Malaysia to ensure that these fundamental holes should be filled as soon as possible.
Okay, so let's talk playbook. So Malaysia as chair, we're in this almost precarious position of leadership, but we want to keep everyone together without creating tiny little fractures within the bloc. Where do you see Malaysia being uniquely placed to lead ASEAN at this time?
Great question, very difficult to answer. I would first venture to say that one of the strongest points that we have is the leadership. That is a strong point. And with that leadership, notwithstanding, Malaysia is indeed not a huge economic power, but we are a free trading nation with many contacts. We tend and we are in fact punching above our weight, and that's because we have the soft power. One of the elements of the soft power is that we have leadership which is able to interact with the major powers in a, I would say, a seamless way. And in many ways it could be said that there is a certain art to it. And that is important, to be able to talk to the United States on the one hand, and to be able to sit very, having to feel guilty and talking and and getting very good response from, say, another superpower, China, and able to navigate what would seem to be the very treacherous waters of geopolitics. And that is one of the strong points. Now, it would be incumbent on Malaysia to ensure that this continuous sense of ability to communicate, the willingness to reach out, to minimize the differences and enhance the commonalities, that will be the challenge in order to deal with the problem at hand.
Well, the other big challenge coming up around the bend is the Trump presidency.
I was just waiting for that.
Talk to me about what the next 4 years of Trump would mean for not just ASEAN, not just Malaysia, not just ASEAN as Malaysia as ASEAN chair, but also for the global south, when you zoom out a little bit, if I may.
Yes, you certainly may. And if you allow me, I would be a little bit candid here, if you don't mind. Trump, if you allow me, is alliterative of the word tariffs. Trump and tariffs. Can you see? And it's not a good thing. Because when you talk about Trump, you talk about tariffs, more tariffs, and even more tariffs. That is one of his so-called playbook in terms of dealing with economic foreign policy. Now, on the other hand, it is not about dealing and raising tariffs, it's about acquisition. It's some kind of a new superpower sort of taking over. As you know, there's talk about him taking over Mexico and talk about Canada being the 51st state. Can you imagine that? Only Trump can pull this sort of thing, and without being able to seem to be alienating himself of his own electorate. I will stay out of commentary on American politics for now because that would take a whole new forum.
So that's another show altogether.
But you did mention, Melisa, about the Global South. That is very, very important. Now, when you mention the Global South, I will have to bring in BRICS, which is one of the pet peeves of the West, let alone Trump. Even way before BRICS, he has been talking about making America great again, which is another way of saying making the others weak again, if you look at the equation, But what we have is a situation where the dichotomy between the Global South and the Global North is narrowing. Not because the Global North want it, it's because the Global South nations combining together are really feeling the strength that they internally have, and now they're flexing those muscles. You could possibly raise the question, why is Malaysia so keen, for example, to join BRICS? Strategic diversity, a diversification of our economic opportunities is something that we should grab on. Notwithstanding the perception by the West that it seems to be moving towards nations like Russia, like China. That is their perception. On our part, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, while maintaining very strong economic, trade, commercial relations with the West, namely the United States, Microsoft, Google, NVIDIA, which is the envy of everybody else. They didn't want to go anywhere else except, and they want to come to Malaysia, which speaks volumes for political stability, for economic viability and resilience. Now, we are able to push that position to ensure that while this continues, we would want to have our strategic options not limited by the prejudices and misconceptions of the West.
Yeah, so it is a delicate balance because often through the lens of the West, if you're not with us, you're against us. How do you think specifically, and you have a point of reference with Trump's first administration, how would you assess or characterize Trump's relationship or perspective of this part of the world, of ASEAN, of this region?
Yet to be tested, but I would not put my money on the fact that he is repentant from the ways of his past ways, making America great again, building walls, both political walls as well as economic walls. I doubt, based from the initial way that he is looking at his own cabinet, that there will be any resiling from that position. If anything, there might be a doubling down on this sense of isolationism, protectionism, economic mercantilism, where the West will be the master again. And that is where I mentioned about BRICS and other multilateral entities, which would prove to be eventually a counterpoint against the dominance of the West. I have to say here, don't wish to go back too much in history, but you are looking at the period where the institutions of World War II, which came about, like the Bretton Woods institutions and other institutions.
It's in decline?
Yeah, it's in decline. And the common philosophy that political economy based on the principles of the West, no offense to Adam Smith, but those things are crumbling. Not because they are not good, but because of the excesses used. Where while this is going on, you have a situation where I'm still citing the mantra of world of what they call it, the rules-based free trade system.
Order,
whose rules and what order are we talking about?
Which is, Prof, the reason why I think this is such an interesting time. I mean, turbulent, but interesting, and particularly as chair of ASEAN, there is an opportunity to lead with our hearts and our minds. How do you think Malaysia might make the most of this year in terms of dealing with these challenges, is there anything you think we should leverage on or really prioritize?
Well, we need to leverage on our soft power, that's number one.
Okay.
We need to look at the positive things rather than the negative things, but we have to call a spade a spade. If the problem in relation, for example, over the South China Sea is in relation to territorial issues, literal countries have to make their stake and has got to make it strongly, but at the same time, not taking action unilaterally in terms of ASEAN, that would cause greater, I don't want to use the word fracture, but that would cause unnecessary creaks, misalignments in the structure or the foundation of ASEAN centrality. Those are things we have to look out for. So to do that, we need a very, very clear policy of, for example, moving ASEAN now and taking the opportunity of a weakening situation in the West to place it on the global stage. Economy, as they say, you know, it's the economy, it's stupid, they always say that. And I think here it is indeed. It is indeed, because as going to be the one of the huge major economic blocks, we will have to state our case very clearly.
I think there's big expectations, right? We are expecting a lot to change as we take the helm. But there's a time constraint. Because of the annual rotation, there are limits to what can be achieved. It's not a panacea. We're not going to solve everything. Hopefully, we'll see progress on issues like the Myanmar crisis. But how do you see us making a mark, or Malaysia making more than a year's worth of leadership? Are there things we can do to make sure there's lasting impact?
Fantastic. I was going to get down to using the phrase great expectations. But in a good way.
There are great expectations.
Yes. Not in the Dickensian way, but in a good way, great expectations that we can actually achieve, if not 100%, at least we can actually substantively move the needle towards progress. You mentioned Myanmar. It will be incumbent on Malaysia as chair to try to encourage more engagement, greater engagement, not to set too many conditions, precedents.
Greater engagement with?
Among all the necessary parties.
All stakeholders.
All stakeholders, because you can see a possible balkanization of Myanmar with the problem at the rate is going. Nobody wants that.
That's
it's
right.
just a multiplication of problems. Yeah. So we want to see that being resolved, and you need to include. But once you start having this problem of not wanting this and the other, now the position as chair, we'll have to soften in that sense our vociferousness against Myanmar, the military regime, but without showing that we accept the regime.
Okay.
So
because one of the biggest criticisms has been, let's take for example the special envoy for Myanmar issues. It's a 1 year, essentially a rotational 1 year role, and there are limitations to what can be done without the institution of an office of special envoy for Myanmar. Using that as an example of how we need to create lasting, more substantial impact beyond just the 1 year of 2025, is it possible for us to do good work and not have it be undone next year?
I appreciate the point that you raised. I wanted to mention it earlier. The fact that it's also a 1 year chairmanship, those are inherent weaknesses. Perhaps there might be a time where you want to relook this whole thing. You know, because it was out of matter of convenience initially to enable. It started with, you know, when the Big Ten came about, the Big Five. Okay, you can as well. Now,
to be fair, let's let everyone know alphabetical order.
To be transparent and fair, let everybody have a chance to go around the circle. So when you had but as you say, there is an inherent weakness. Once you have that, you will have a situation where the year comes. It's not my problem anymore. That will be a failure of centrality. I don't think, and I'm very sure that is not Malaysia's position. That's why I want to say that, you know, even we are looking at this year's chair, we're not just looking at the year. We're looking at sustainability and in fact, all the way to 2045, because that is where we talk about the ASEAN community, the vision of
What is the vision for the ASEAN community?
Well, there are a couple of things which are really out in the public sphere. Number one is to make sure that all the three so-called pillars on the tick box will be fulfilled. These three main pillars will be first on the political and security side. South China Sea, Myanmar, and other things that may be propping up over littoral disputes, territorial disputes, no military regimes or no outwardly very autocratic governments, general sense of democracy, but not necessarily in the Western sense, but the ones that ASEAN countries, can actually own up to and feel. Number two, economic community. There has got to be a tick box to say by that time, do we really have an ASEAN community where the income gap has been reduced? Let's not talk about total equality. No nation can have total equal parity when it comes to economic growth. But the differences should be reduced. The gap.
Intra-country.
Yes, within ASEAN.
Within ASEAN, okay.
And thirdly, the social and the cultural side of things. Buzzwords, people-to-people linkages. But if you were to travel to, say, Jakarta, would you say I am an ASEAN? Nobody says that I'm Malaysian.
Is that the vision one day we'll say?
Unlike, for example, people say I'm European. You see, it's not going to happen because that is insufficient proof.
That's a good example.
Yeah. That should be how we could go about it. And that would involve immigration issues. That would involve from the ground exchanges between students, from the primary level all the way to the tertiary level, exchanges in R&D, for example, the question of intellectual property, how selfish are we towards what we have, are we prepared to share, and not to mention even under the social cultural side, I forgot to mention the military side as well, in the question of security. Will that ever be achieved where there will be a sense that there will be ASEAN security in terms of military defense? Because by definition, military defense of a nation, nobody's going to share anything with you. I won't trust you, you won't trust me. Nation against the other.
So we talked about centrality at the start of our conversation. Yes. I want to see how ASEAN can evolve. So let's go back to when ASEAN first started and all that it has managed to achieve and all that it hasn't, all the missed opportunities of progress. Where do you see ASEAN heading in the years to come?
Call me an optimist. I see that in spite of the hurdles, of the obstacles, there is no huge insurmountable stumbling block. It will be progress. It's not a Sisyphean situation.
Okay.
You roll it up and the boulder starts coming back.
There's possibilities, potential here. Potential which is realistic and which can be achieved, provided that the chair every year takes that kind of attitude to be proactive, to ensure things are done. And this is where I need to say it again. There are things like the ideals and there are things like the reality. And between that, there's the great shadow of unfulfilled promises. This is where decisions made at this level must be translated into cogent, solid, tangible action. That will be the great test. You can have consensus meetings, but the action is not seen there. It's not palpable. You don't even feel it, then you know that you're not there yet. That will be the test. How do you think we can ensure that we don't fail that test of inaction?
Constant action, constant reminders, constant need to talk, constant need among the leaders themselves. Example, retreat, just very recently. Yes. Those are the things you need. Retreat not just bilaterally, that is important. You have really multilateral retreats, but not as a functional, formal retreat, which you have it under the ASEAN structure, which needs to be improved. As an eminent member representing Malaysia when it comes to this in the ASEAN forum, I would want to see more of this, lack of ceremonial.
So these types of informal gatherings, why are they so beneficial?
Because the leaders are the ones to move their respective member states.
So it's an opportunity to talk about issues without real ceremony.
And also to take decisive action. Having talked about and to take action. That's my point.
Well, Professor, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Time is up?
Time is up. Time flies talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your insights. And hopefully we'll see a fantastic and action-filled year.
Thank you for having me.
As Chair of ASEAN. Thank you for your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thanks so much for watching. Good night.